Are you struggling with digging and opening your well? Maybe it's not you, but the techniques that you're trying. By the end of this week's video, I'm going to show you 5 different ways to dig your well and 5 different ways to open it. And at the very end, make sure you stick around because I'm going to show you the way that I like digging and opening, ending with a single pool that gets me to around 5 inches tall. And that technique scales perfectly with light clay around a pound all the way up to 10 plus pounds. So if that's something that you want to see, stick around and find out what they are. All right, I got my 2-pound ball. Let's go ahead and center it like we normally do. Roll it around, hit it down, and compress. Get that cone shape. Seal the edge at 3 o'clock. And then we're going to start coning up and down to get this into the center mound before we start going over digging the well. So, got my nice sponge, put it between my hands, push down, get it more stuck, and we'll do our first cone up. So squeeze at the base, use the heels of my hands to push the clay into the center, causing it to rise. And then remove the skirt on the outside. That little groove right there is where my pinky can go into now. And then I push the clay forward with my left, and I squeeze inward with my right until I get my nice mound to then start digging my well. And so when we go over the different ways to dig and open, I'm gonna kind of pair them with movements that are very similar to each other. So the first way to dig your well, that is the way that I learned, and I still dig the same way or a variation of it, is using your thumbs. One goes on top of the other, and you apply downwards pressure, usually with whichever thumb is on top. So in this case would be my left thumb driving down, and my right thumb is touching the clay. Now as you get used to it, you can have both thumbs to the side, but you don't want to push and pull towards you as you dig because you want to go for depth and don't necessarily open at the same time. And so normally you may have this little mound here that you want to remove. So I take the sponge, hold it between both hands, and I just apply downward pressure in the center without letting my hands shift and move. And this creates a little divot. This will be my pilot hole. And then I'm going to add a little water, put my thumbs on top of each other, and start applying that pressure. Now when you dig, you can have your hands resting on the board and your thumbs are moving downwards into the center, like so. This allows you to stay grounded and have support. However, if your clay gets dry really quickly, it gets sticky and then it can throw it off. If you have a little more stability with your hands, you can have it floating like this. But usually when you're beginning, having your hands upright and not brace against something tends to cause more wobbliness. And so whenever you dig your well, right now this is how my hands look. My left hand's applying downwards pressure, and then the side of my right thumb is touching this side, and then the side, like this part, this side of my left is touching the opposite side, and I'm digging. All right, and then depth is all based on what you're making. Normally I always aim for a 1/2 inch of clay, and that's the basic mechanics. You just dig until you get your depth. Now I'm going to actually squeeze it inward a little bit to get it more narrow, and I want to kind of show you the variation, the way that I dig now. So I still dig roughly the same way, thumbs on top of each other. However, I turn my thumbs. So instead of having the tips touch the clay, I turn my thumbs and my hands sideways so the sides of my thumbs are touching the sides of the clay. So it's touching at these times. So we have, what was that, 4 and like 7. So the reason for that, if I go straight down with the tips of my thumbs, I tend to just go for depth. But if I can rotate my thumbs sideways and I dig, I can go for width and depth at the same time. So as you can see, as I'm digging, my opening is far wider than it was in the previous way I was digging. So if I continue digging this way, it just saves time because my opening becomes twice or 3 times as wide as the previous method. So once again, if you go straight down, your arms tend to get lifted up. But if you turn, your wrists kind of bend. So it's a little harder on your wrists, but it just allows your hands to stay a little more flat and level rather than upright. All right, so we get that 1/2 inch thick base, and now we're ready to open. So the way that I learned how to open my well was with your thumbs on the inside, same way we dug, but this time your hands pull away from the center. So one hand moves to the left, one hand moves to the right. And as you open, the clay should gradually become wider. Now this is a good beginner technique. However, if one hand tends to pull harder than the other, which is very common as you start, the clay wall gets pretty uncentered fairly fast. So for example, as I pull, if my left hand pulls harder than my right, you can start seeing a little wobbliness start to arise. So let's get it back to being centered, or let's get it back to being more narrow. So when you open, as long as both hands are moving outwards evenly, so moving outwards, then your clay should more or less stay centered. So if this is the way that you really like doing it, another variation, instead of moving your hands outwards, you can just kind of squeeze the clay between your thumbs like this. And that also opens. All right, so let's get this back to being narrow, and I'll show you the variation of the thumbs on the inside. And this is the way that I actually teach my beginners now. All right, so let's get it centered. There we go. Take out the water in the well. So the benefit of digging the well with your thumbs on the inside moving outwards is it's very natural to your body. Your wrists aren't overly bending, and it's just easy for your joints. However, one hand can tend to pull harder than the other, causing it to become wobbly. So a nice variation of it is, instead of pulling outwards towards your left and right, you actually shift your hands so they're at midnight, so at 12 o'clock, and your thumbs are on the inside, pointer fingers on the outside, and you move your thumbs to your pointer fingers. So it looks like this from the top view, or this in case the bottom view. And so the benefit of that is your hands are moving together as a unit. When they move together as a unit, the odds of them moving independently of each other are very slim because they're moving together. So normally when you dig your well, you want water or slip in here, but for the demo purposes, I wanted to make sure that you can see the inside and how my hands move. Now I have to wash my hands because someone popped in and made a visit, so let's get this slip back on. Nice and slick, that feels good. And so normally when I teach this to my students, I have them kind of make two C's with their hands, put them together like this, and then they go on the inside, where thumbs are the inside, pointer fingers are outside at 12 o'clock or midnight, and then you move your thumbs to your pointer fingers. You can stack your thumbs and your fingers on top of each other like this, or side by side, or one stacked and one side by side. So normally what I do is I do thumbs stacked on top of each other and pointer fingers left and right of each other like this. But for demo purposes, I'm going to open my hands so you can see how the movement works. And of course, when you start off, always try to keep your arms braced up against something for stability. All right, so thumbs are moving towards each other, nice and slow. My pointer fingers are just kind of there to ensure that this wall doesn't protrude too far out and change its angle. And as I go, you can see that my depth started going from this depth and it started getting a little shallower. So as you dig, you always want to make sure that you maintain that same thickness at the bottom from the center outwards, or you just have to go back and compress like what I'm doing. Let's just go again and compress a little more, and then open. And the reason why I like having my thumbs stacked on each other is because just like how we dug, the outermost thumb, so in this case my left thumb, is pushing against my right. Now the downside of this technique, it's harder on your wrists because as your wrists break, it tends to create more stretching along that joint. So it's just a little harder if you have some wrist problems. But it tends to open the well a little more centered, and it allows you to kind of create a nice strong foundation moving forward for pulling your walls. All right, let's get this back and go over another way to dig your well. All right, so another way to dig. This one's more popular for the students that tend to have longer fingernails. And the way to do this one is you end up taking one hand, left or right, doesn't matter. You brace with one hand, and your other hand is digging with your tips of your fingers, or your middle finger or your thumb finger. So if you have long thumbnails, this usually helps out. So as you dig, you brace your hands up against this webbing, and your digging hand, my right hand in this case, is applying pressure forward at a kind of 45-degree angle. So not straight down, but at a nice diagonal. Now the cool thing about this technique is it's interchangeable. So if the bracing with your left hand doesn't feel nice, you can try to brace with your right and dig this way. Okay, but if you have long fingernails with your middle finger, pointer finger, most likely you'll gouge the clay. So a nice variation of it is you take your sponge, You can wrap it around a finger if you want, like this. Add some water, and then use this to dig. Now the downside of digging with just a sponge at the tip is it's harder to feel how deep you're going. So you're going to have to stop more periodically. But the benefit is the clay tends to stay slick because you have moisture in the sponge. Okay, so whichever way feels comfortable. I'm left-handed, so it feels more comfortable to dig with my left. But like I said, it's interchangeable. You can use either hand. So once again, if you have long fingernails, this might be a good alternative because you can wrap the sponge around your fingers. All right, so that's to dig your well, getting the same depth. Now, the opening that really pairs well with this type of digging is whichever hand did the digging, this hand actually pulls the clay towards you. So it looks like this, where this one's bracing, this digs, and it pulls. So dig and pull. So actually, I'm going to shift my body. So now this is my midnight. This is my 6 o'clock. This is where the movement is occurring. So let's get the wheel spinning. And as we dig, so the same way, this is how we dug. And then my left hand's going to pull the clay towards me like this. Or sorry, my right hand's going to pull the clay towards me like this. Okay, and both hands brace on each other. And then I just start pulling. So my middle finger, the fingertip, the tip of my middle finger is pulling the clay towards me. All right, and then like I said, it's interchangeable. So I'll take the water out so you can see. So if you like to dig with the other hand, then do that, and then just pull. You can also brace your thumb against this hand, and then this kind of moves together as a unit. So it's locked in like this. Now the cool thing about this technique is when you start using a single finger, it's the same method. You're using the fingertips, the middle fingertip to then compress. So you can really get deeper if you want. Another cool way is you can actually open the well quite far to flare this out if you want. So if I go in, do that compression, and I just start squeezing and I'm pulling out towards me. We can make a pretty cool dish fairly quickly. Okay, now let's get this back to that cylinder again. And then compress the clay walls. Alright, so let's talk about the digging again with the sponge. So same thing, since most people are right-handed, I'm going to use my right hand. You dig with one finger wrapped around the sponge, or you can do your middle finger or both fingers if you can really hold it. Dig, and then you can pull towards your body too. Nice, fast, clean, efficient. So a nice way to dig and open. So like I said, this technique is really good for those who have longer fingernails because you have the sponge there to wrap around your fingers. All right, so let's close this back up. And I'm going to show a nice variation of that digging, but with a tool instead. This time when we dig, another way to do it, instead of using your thumbs or your fingers, you can actually use a wooden knife. And so the benefit of the wooden knife, if you have longer fingernails and the sponge didn't feel nice, you can use this. And it's very similar to the brace and push because you're digging at an angle, but this time you're actually just holding this with both hands. And then you're just kind of pushing it in the center and just kind of driving it down nice and easily, kind of like trimming. But in this case, we're just going for depth. We're not trying to remove clay. And the benefit of going in at a 45-degree angle is it opens the clay up naturally. And get rid of that little lip. And it's easier to maintain this angle than trying to go straight down. Normally when you go straight down, the tool tends to move because it grabs the clay. But if you go in at a nice 45, you're only really applying pressure on this 6 o'clock clay wall. And another benefit is you can dig the well without the clay being overly wet. Okay, so you can see the clay getting a little wobbly. That's because I open and close it too much, but as you guys practice, it shouldn't get too wobbly as long as you're really braced. And then I add a little water because I think that did help the clay not get too wobbly. And now to open, same way we opened with our hands moving this way, is you take this tool and you pull it towards yourself. So you brace up and you just start slowly bringing it towards your body. It got a little wobbly, but then it's centered out. Got a little wobbly again. So let's kind of compress the clay at the bottom. You can see those slight wobbles. Let's see if we can fix it with this technique. Okay, a little water. This time I'm going to rotate the tool, so I'm using more of this side, so it's not the surface. And I'm just kind of pulling this towards me. Nice and even. There we go. Starting to recenter itself. And we got a nice open well without even having to touch it with our fingers. And don't mind this inside being all wonky. Like I said, it's from opening and closing it so many times. All right, so there's another one with a tool. Now the tool that I recommend, this one is a little harder because it's so thin. There are these wooden dowels. This is used to make teapot spouts out of slabs. And so this works really well for my students with longer fingernails. They apply pressure, but I can do another video on various tools that help later. All right, so this I could start pulling, but let's get this closed up. And I'm going to show you my favorite way to dig and open. All right, so I had to recenter a new piece of clay because the older one got really messed up with opening and closing so many times. So this is 2 pounds, and I'm going to go over the way that I like to dig and open. The way I do it is different than the way that I teach. Well, a little bit. And so when I dig, I still use my thumbs. I still apply downwards pressure, but the only difference is I do that variation where you turn it sideways, so you go for depth and width at the same time. And so I still kind of brace when I need to, push. Sometimes if I'm digging really fast, I kind of have my arms upright like this. Just depends on my mood. Or if I drank too much caffeine that morning, I might have to do a little more of a brace. But upright, easier on your wrists. Okay, still digging and getting my depth that way. All right, and then the way to open. I use a method where I put my left hand on the inside and I'm squeezing the clay between my left fingers on the inside and my thumb on the outside, like this. So my pointer fingers are moving towards my body a little bit by squeezing. And then my sponge hand, my right hand, is underneath this thumb to apply lubrication and pressure from the outside. A little more than my thumb. So with this crosscut, it looks like this, where I know this is an open wall already, but basically I squeeze and open, and then my thumb hand is there to also support. And this pairs really nicely because you can squeeze and then do a pull right after. So I call it the pinch and pull. And the reason why I like this is because it scales really well from anywhere from a pound of clay all the way up to 6, 7, 8, 9 pounds of clay as well. As long as you can get your hands on the inside and squeeze, you can do this technique. And so I'm going to shift my body, like I said, so that the camera can better see where my hands are moving. And this is going to be my midnight. And your left hand's going to fall naturally. So in that case, if that's my midnight, my left hand is applying pressure right here, which is about, let's see, if this is 6, that's like about 4-ish, 4:30. And then my sponge hand is going to be underneath that. So wheel speed, a little slower than half speed. This is about maybe 2/5. So positioning my hand like this, squeezing the clay, fingers moving towards my palm, and then my sponge engaging on the outside when necessary. Okay. And then the palm here can also push in a little bit to create a nice straight wall. And the cool thing is you actually don't even need the sponge hand. So I'm going to soak this up so you can kind of see the movements. So I can just squeeze the clay like that. Okay. A nice variation. So let me actually compress this a little more. A nice variation to the pinch is you actually bring your pointer finger on the outside, and then your middle finger is actually doing the pulling. So it looks something like this. And the benefit of this one is your left pointer finger supporting the clay wall here, allowing this to go to a very straight wall. So if you keep pulling and compressing, you can get a really nice cylinder. Okay, so actually I'm going to close it up so I can show you the whole thing, including the pull at the same time. So the two variations. Okay, so let's open this up a little bit. All right, so the normal one with all fingers in, or at least my pointer finger and middle finger in. So open by pinching and compressing. Don't need my sponge hand just yet. And then right when I think this is a good size, I might have a little water because it's getting a little dry. Like right here, I think that's a good width. Then I can engage at the base of the clay. Really squeeze the clay a little more with my pointer fingers, and then I'm going to start the pull. Okay, there we go. And we got my first pull. Now the inside's not completely flat. There's still this slope, so I'll then push that out for my second attempt. So let's get this down and show you the other variation with the pointer finger on the outside. All right, so the variation with the pointer finger on the outside, like I said, applies more stability to the outside clay wall. It's a little more awkward on your hands because there's 3 separate parts, but squeezing together. I call this the claw. Okay, so this is my left hand. You can kind of see how it's set up. Sponge will be pushing underneath. So I'm going to open. Middle finger, the side of my middle finger is at the bottom of the clay where the base meets the clay wall. And then my pointer finger is on the opposite side, compressing. And then my palm actually engaging and pushing up against the clay at 6 o'clock. Okay, so squeeze. And just to show you how efficient this is, if I add some water, I'm just squeezing and lifting the clay up. I actually did a pretty substantial pull with one hand. So that's how cool this technique is and how powerful it is when you are creating the cylinder. Well, let's bring it back down, actually show you the easier way. So let's compress this back down. Now, of course, it's going to be harder to do that when you first start. So as you guys are learning this technique, I do recommend just the pinch first and then integrate the pointer finger on the outside. And then this is the way that I do recommend you try it. So let's compress this lip. Pinch, open, sponge hand wrapped around my finger like this, engaging at the base, really pushing that clay in, squeezing the clay. It's getting a little dry. I'm going to take a break there, add a little water, and then continue. So compress the bottom again, really open the inside with my middle finger now, and then do a pull. So with the sponge hand, you can really aggressively pull, and you can pretty much get your final height, or at least close to your final height, with one pull. In this case, the open and pull. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. We talked about the various ways to dig your well, to open your well, and at the end, summarize the powerfulness of the pinch and pull to create this cylinder with one pull. So hopefully I was able to show you guys something new and you can adapt it to your own throwing practices. And if you had the opportunity to learn any of these techniques, which one do you think would work best for you? Let me know in the comments below. But at this time, I want to say thank you to all the Mud Club members. I hope you guys are accessing the document that I have that goes over all of the techniques that we did in a nice, organized, and thoughtful way to find the videos. And if you would like to join, all the information is in the description below. And once again, if you have any ideas or any requests on videos or techniques that you guys want to see, let me know. I'm more than happy to create those videos for you. And it helps me out because then I have some inspiration and something to look forward to than just what's stuck in my own head. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you folks in the next one.